Okay, so we're going to start today on Kuf Zayin, Amud Aleph, and we're going to do Kuf Zayin and Kuf Chet together because they're both short and we have an hour, and we didn't get to do the Daf on Shabbat here, so we're going to see if we can encapsulate both of them into one shiur. I think we'll be able to do it. So in any case, we left off on Friday on the top of Kuf Zayin, Amud Aleph, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines from the top, where it says Amrele Mor Yanuka or Mor Kashisha Breder of Chisda Ravashi. So Mor Yanuka and Mor Kashisha, the son of Rav Chisda, said to Ravashi, Zimna Chadaikla Amemar La'atrin. There was a time when Amemar came to our city, Velo Havalan Chamra, we didn't have any wine. So what do we do for Kiddush then? So Aitin, or for Havdalah. So Aitin Ale Shichra, Velo Avdil. We brought him beer. This was a date beer that they used to drink. He wouldn't use the beer for Havdalah. He said beer is not good for Havdalah. And so what did he do? Uvat tevat. And he went to sleep without eating. He went to sleep hungry. Why did he go to sleep hungry? Because you're not allowed to eat before Havdalah. He didn't think that beer was a legitimate beverage on which to make Havdalah. So he went to sleep without eating that night. And he figured maybe tomorrow morning I'll be able to go to the store and get some wine for Havdalah. The next day we went to the store because obviously Saturday night things are not open. Even back then, you couldn't get anything. So the next day they went to the store, they got him some wine, and then he was able to have breakfast. Lishana, the next year, and probably it should say, we're probably missing a word there. It sounds like it should say something like the Shana, the something reflecting that it was the next year. But anyway, the Shana, the next year, to Iklal Atrin, he came another time to the city. The Lo Havalan Chamram, we had the same problem. Aitina Shichra. So we again brought him beer because we didn't have wine for him to make Havdalah. Amar, he said, Ihachi Chamar Medinahu. So what happened was that he said, you know what? I see that these people, they don't drink wine. Wine is not a common beverage here. They drink beer. That's what they drink. So I'm not going to ask for wine. It's Chamar Medina. This is a halachic concept that means that if the beverage, the beverage that's drunk for special occasions is not wine in a certain community, that beverage could be treated like wine. So for example, if people more commonly drink whiskey, let's say, or vodka, let's say Russians, right? So in a Russian community, wine they don't drink so much, but vodka they drink. So for Havdalah, they could use vodka because for them that's Chamar Medina. That's their most common beverage. Not just meaning not a beverage that you drink for breakfast. We're talking about a beverage that you drink as alcohol, an alcoholic beverage. So in the same way, Chamar Medina, if you're in a place where either wine is not that commonly drunk or it's too expensive, people don't drink it, they drink vodka, they drink other stuff, so then you would drink those other things. Now the halacha brought in Shulchan Aruch is, well, we'll see. Shema Mina. So this is the conclusions from this piece are as follows. Talat, 3 things. Shema Mina hamavdil b'tfilat rak she'et yalakos. Shema Mina asur lo l'adam she'ochal kodem she'avdil. Shema Mina mishelo hivdil b'motzei Shabbat mavdil ve'olech kol haShabbat kulo. Then we learn 3 halachot from here. Number 1, even though Amemar already prayed Arvit, he still had to say Havdalah, which is a repetition. You're right. The Gemara keeps saying from many cases, we learn from this that even though you said Atachon Antanu in the Amidah, you still have to make Havdalah. That you pointed out. You're right. So that keeps repeating itself. We also can derive from this that you're not allowed to eat before Havdalah because he refused to eat before making Havdalah. And the third thing we see from here is that even though he wasn't able to make Havdalah Saturday night, he could still make it on Sunday and potentially all the way through Tuesday. So till Sunday you cannot even eat? He didn't eat because he didn't have Havdalah. Right, so if a person forgot, then they don't remember not to eat either. But if they weren't able to make Havdalah, then in theory they would wait to eat until they had the chance to make Havdalah. Sunday, Monday and Tuesday. No. Up to Tuesday, but only with the Borei Priya Geffen and Hamavdil, that's it. Only if you forget, you're not allowed to wait till that long. Right. Yeah. So this is the halacha brought in Shulchan Aruch is like this, that on Friday night, you have to use wine. If you don't have wine, use the challah, because you're allowed to use bread for kiddush. Daytime, you're allowed to use the Chamar Medina. You're allowed to use, let's say, and many Ashkenazim, they use schnapps, right? So you've seen, I'm sure, many times, in the Ashkenazi synagogues, they'll use schnapps for the kiddush of the daytime. Yeah, it's Chamar Medina. They drink it all the time. They drink schnapps all the time, so that's a Chamar Medina. It's the common drink. They drink it in the morning, so they would drink. Yeah. So for kiddush of the day, the daytime kiddush, or for Havdalah, they're allowed to use those beverages. Okay, Ba'amine Rav Huna Rav Chizda. Rav Huna asked Rav Chizda the following. And actually, according to the Hagaot Tabach on the side, it should be the opposite. It should be that Rav Chizda asked Rav Huna. In any case, Ma'u lekadushei shichra. Can you make kiddush on shichra, on date beer? So Amar, he said, Hashtau ma pirzoma ute'enei v'isnei deba'ai minei merav v'rav mi Rabbi Chiya v'Rabbi Chiya mi Rabbi v'lo pashatle shichra mi ba'aya. So what he said was, there were several drinks that have been questioned. In other words, their usability for kiddush has been questioned, such as pirzoma is beer made from barley. Te'enei is beer made from figs, obviously fig beer, okay? And v'isnei is made from certain kinds of berries, okay? So these were finer beers. So if those better beers were a question and nobody was able to get an answer, we asked Rav asked Rabbi Chiya asked Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and nobody was able to answer it. So shichra mibaya, so certainly the beer of dates, which was considered an inferior type of beer, certainly we can't use that. So savor mina kadushay lo mekadushinan ilave aval avdulay mavdelinan. So he inferred from that, you can't use it for kiddush, but maybe we could use it for havdalah, because havdalah has a lower standard, a little bit of a lower standard. So Amar lahu Rav Chizda said to them, Hachi Amar Rav, this is what Rav said, Kishem shein mekadushin alav kachin mavdilin alav. Just like you can't make kiddush on this beer, you also can't make havdalah on this beer. It's inferior. You're not allowed to use it. Itmar Nami was similarly stated. Amar Rav Tachlifa Amar Avimi Abar Avimi Amar Shmuel. Rav Tachlifa Bar Avimi said in the name of Shmuel, Kishim Shen Mekadushin Alav Kachin Mavdilin Alav. Just like you're not allowed to use date beer for kiddush, you can't use it for havdalah either. Levi Shadar the Rebbe, Levi sent to Rebbe Shichra Bar Telesar Miganeh. He sent date beer that had 13 soakings, which seems to mean, Rashbam brings an interpretation here that Shenatana Mayim al Atmarim v'achar kach notnam al Atmarim achirim v'chen hevi achirim ad shalosh esrei pamim. In other words, he used 13 batches of dates to extract. It was very strong, because he used 13 batches of dates to extract this beer. That's the first interpretation that he gives. Or some say that it means that they purified it 13 times. Whatever it was really intense. Okay, so then Ta'ameh, he tasted it. Havav basim tuva, it was very sweet. So you can imagine 13 batches of dates. It's going to be a lot of sugar. Not good for diabetics. This beer, very high in sugar. So what happens? Amar kegon zeroi lakadesh alav velomar alav kol shirot vetushbachot shebaolam. He said, this is so good that we should make kiddush on this, and you should say every praise and every song of Hashem over the wine like this, because it's not wine, it's beer, but this drink is so good, it's the best drink ever. Balelia Tzareh. We had this earlier in the Masechet also. At night, he had a really bad stomach ache from that, because
it was poison. It was ula.
Right before. That was earlier in the Masechet where he said, this is so good, and then at night he said it's killing him, right?
But he had diarrhea.
Yeah, same thing here. So same thing here. So he said, Amar miyasran umifayes. He said something that causes you to suffer so much, we should use it to praise Hashem. So originally he thought the beer was really good, but then when he had the after effects of the stomach aches, he said, forget it. This is not good. Amar Rav Yosef, Edor barabim de lo ishti shichra. He said, I'm going to swear in public. Swearing in public means that you can never do hatarat nedarim. You do it al dat rabim. You say that I'm swearing in a way that I'll never be able to cancel it, that I'm never going to drink beer. Beer was considered very bad for you. Amar Rava said, Ishti me zorion velo ishti shichra. He said, I would rather drink the water that flax soaks in, which is really disgusting water that has a putrid smell, rather than drinking beer, because it's so bad for you, because the effect on your body is so bad. V'amar Rava says, Teheve shakyute shichra mandi mekadesh shichra. Somebody who makes kiddush on beer should have his drink all the time be beer. In other words, he should be so poor that he won't be able to afford wine if he drinks beer all the time. Because if a person uses the beer for kiddush, which is an inferior drink, then he'll become so poor that he can only afford beer even during the week. That's what he was saying. In other words, it's a lower type of beverage. We don't want to use it for kiddush. Rav Ashkechei, Rav Huna de Kaddish Shichra. that once Rav found that Rav Huna was making kiddush on beer, Amar Le, he said to him, Sharei Abba lemiknei istire mishichra. He said, Father, that was what they used to call him. That was the term for Rav. His name was Abba, right? So he said to him, now you're making money from beer. You do everything with beer. So if you look at the Rashbam says, Hitchil lasot shechar ulishtaker bo rather. He started to make beer and to make money from it, right? V'yafeh b'einecha u'mekadesh et alav. That now you're making kiddush on it. Why? Because you went into the beer business. Because you went into the beer business, now you started to appreciate beer more. So you started to use it for kiddush.
What happened to Rashbam? Appears here the Rashi are small?
Yeah, because the Rashi, apparently something happened with the Rashi that on Masechet Pesachim at the end, that it was missing. A large part of it was missing. Some people said it was destroyed. There's different stories about it. I'm not sure what the actual official historical story is, but I know that there was some kind of a problem that they lost part of it, so therefore they put Rashbam in this Masechet, which Rashbam is kind of like in between Rashi and Tosafot in terms of the length. He's not as long as Tosafot, but he's not as short as Rashi. He expands on some of the ideas more. So the point is that the Rashbam says that even though here he had wine available to him, since he loved beer, he was making the kiddush on beer because he had gone into the beer business and he started to appreciate it more. And in this case, it's a funny language because it says Rav Ashkeche Rav Huna de Kadisha Shechra. Really, it was Rav making the kiddush on beer, it seems, and it means Rav Kama Ashkeche Rav Huna de Kadisha Shechra. Rav Huna found him that he was making kiddush on beer. That seems to be what it is. Otherwise, it should say Rav Ashkeche le Rav Huna, that he found Rav Huna, that he was drinking and making kiddush on beer. That's how I think it's supposed to go. And then Amar Le, and he said to him, Sharei Abba. That's why he said he called him Abba back. Rav Huna called him Abba because Abba was the name of Rav. That's what they called him. That because now you can buy everything with beer, meaning because now you're in the beer business. So Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, "Ein mekadeshin ela la yayin." You can only make kiddush on wine. Ve'en mevarachin ela la yayin, and you can only make barachot on wine. So atu ashichra va'amaya milo mevarachina nalayu shakol niyabed v'ro. Are you telling me that you don't make a bracha when you drink beer? You don't say shakol? You don't say a blessing on it? No. What it means is not that you don't make a blessing on any beverage other than wine. Amar Abaye achi kamar. This is what it means. Ein omrim haveh kos shel bracha levarech ela la yayin. What it means is you don't summon a kos shel bracha. If you have to make a blessing that is related to a mitzvah, you always use wine. You don't use any other beverage. It doesn't mean that there's no blessing on water. It just means that you don't use water for any kind of special mitzvah. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, "En mekadeshin ala shechar." We don't make kiddush on beer. Mishum Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon amru. In the name of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, they said mekadeshin miti'imat yain koshu. I'm sorry, Mikadeshin. That according to Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon, they said yes, you could use beer for kiddush. Okay, but that's not what the halacha is. And then it goes on to say, "Te'imat yain koshehu." You should be able to have just a tiny taste of the wine, and that's enough. However, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer Melo Lugma, that you have to have a cheek full of wine in order to be Yotzei. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, V'cheitani Rav Gidal Demin Neresh, that Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, and so too did Rav Gidal say, who was from Neresh, HaMekadesh V'ta'am Melo Lugma, Yatza, V'im Lav Lo Yatza, that when you drink from the cup of Kiddush, you have to drink at least a cheeks full, like a mouthful of wine. It doesn't have to be any more than that. So the cup has to be at least a revi'it, but you need to drink at least a mouthful of wine in order to fulfill the mitzvah. Somebody does. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, "Anatanena la lo gidul bar menashia, lo gidul bar manyumi, ela gidul stama." That the name of the rabbi who said this wasn't Gidul bar Menashia and not Gidul bar Manyumi, ela Gidul stama. Lamai nafkamina. Why do we have to know that he was just Gidul or Rav Gidal? That he didn't have any additional name appended to his name. Nafkamina the mirma didei adidei. Because we have to know who says different statements. Because if we find a contradiction between two statements, but they weren't really said by the same person, then it's not really a contradiction. So we have to know who is the author of the statement. It was Rav Gidal. Now, in this case, this is the halacha, that if you make kiddush or you make havdalah, you have to drink at least a mouthful of the wine. Literally, it means a cheekful, right? But people don't usually put it in their cheek to test. But it has to be and it doesn't have to be that the person who made kiddush, he could take a sip. Somebody else has to drink, so that there's at least a milologma, at least the quantity that fits in your cheek, is drunk from the wine. The halacha is not that you can use beer for kiddush, though, even though that was the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. So now we're going to move a little bit back to the Mishnah. Finally, we haven't seen the Mishnah in a long time. You probably forgot what the Mishnah was about because we got into this whole thing about kiddush, Havdalah. We forgot that we were talking about Pesach. We were talking about the Seder originally, and what you're allowed to do on Erev Pesach. You're not allowed to eat mina mincha from mina mincha u'limala or samuch lo mincha. You're not allowed. Once it comes to the mincha time, you're not allowed to eat anymore because you want to be hungry for the nighttime. Which mincha is it talking about? There's two times that are called mincha. There's mincha gedolah, which starts at, let's say, 12:30. In other words, it's the earliest time. It's a half hour after midday. And then there's something called mincha ketana, which is 2.5 hours before sunset. It's much later. So in a perfect day where sunrise is at 6 a.m. and sunset is at 6 p.m., mincha gedolah is 12:30. Mincha ketana is 3:30. That's a 3-hour difference. So which one is the Mishnah telling you have to stop eating? Do you have to stop eating meals at 12:30 or 3:30? That's what the Gemara is going to ask. Ibai, they asked a question. Samuch la mincha gedolah. Tanan, are we talking about mincha gedolah? You have to stop eating at 12:30. The way you can remember which one is mincha gedolah is because mincha gedolah is a longer time, right? Mincha ketana is a shorter time. Or maybe we're talking about you can eat all the way up to 3:30. At 3:30 you have to stop. We turn to Amud Bet. Maybe the reason that you have to stop eating on Erev Pesach is that we're worried that if you start a meal, you're going to forget to do your Korban Pesach. And when is the time for Korban Pesach? When does that begin? At 12:30. So they said don't eat starting at 12:30. O dilma, or maybe samuch lemincha ketanatanan. Or really the reason is that you're not allowed to eat starting at 3:30. Okay? Umishum matzah dilma ate lemichla lematzah achila gasa. That we're concerned that if you eat from 3:30 on, you're not going to have an appetite to eat at night. So the question is this gezerah of not eating in the afternoon of Erev Pesach, was it connected to the Korban Pesach? And therefore the time should be set by the Korban Pesach. 12:30 should be the beginning of the prohibition. Or is it set by is it really about the eating of the night, giving you an appetite for the nighttime? In which case, if you ate at 12:30, you're going to be hungry by 9 o'clock at night. You're not going to be still full. 3:30, okay, if you ate a big meal at 3:30, 4 o'clock, maybe it's going to affect your dinner. Okay? So, Amar Ravina says, Tashma, come and listen. Afilu Agrippas HaMelech, shehu regel lechol b'tesha sha'ot, oto hayom, lo yochal ad shetech. Even Agrippas HaMelech, who normally eats at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that was his breakfast. He was a real man, he didn't need to eat in the morning. He waited till 3 o'clock. So even for him, he's not allowed to eat on Erev Pesach until the nighttime. He was, as the Mefarshim say here, he was Melech Kasher Haya. He was one of the Chashmonaim, but he was one of the good ones. So he, from that dynasty. So he followed the halacha. He didn't eat starting at that time. So now the question is like this. If you're telling me that when is the prohibition? From 3:30. So then, Hainu Rabute da Agrippas. Then it explains why Agrippas is significant. Why is he significant? Because even though the prohibition is at 3:30, he stopped at 3 o'clock. Why did he stop at 3 o'clock? Because he knew if he starts eating at 3 o'clock, it's going to run in past the time. Okay, however, but if you think that the prohibition starts at 12:30, my Rabute da Agrippas. What is the chidush of Agrippas? The prohibition was already from 12:30. You're telling me even Agrippas who eats at 3 o'clock can't eat at 12:30? What are you talking about? Even nobody's eating from 12:30, and you're mentioning that he eats normally at 3 o'clock. What is the relevance of 3 o'clock if it starts at 12:30? It must be that it starts at 3:30, and we're saying that even for him, that his meal is at 3 o'clock. He's not allowed to eat. He has to wait till the nighttime. Rather, it must be that we're talking about starting at 3:30. From 3:30 on. And you have to adjust it for the day and time. So it usually ends up being closer to 4:30-ish because of the time of year. But the point is 2.5 halachic hours before sunset, you have to stop eating a meal on Erev Pesach. Sof my rabutei d'Agrippas. Hamatiyalei zman yisura. But still we have the question, why did they bring the example of Agrippas? He's following the same rules as everybody else. He knows that his meal is going to run into the prohibited time. So even though he starts 3 o'clock, a half hour before, he's not going to do it because it's too close. But what's the big deal? Because you might think to yourself, Agrippas is a different metabolism than us, right? He doesn't eat breakfast till 3 o'clock. That's unusual. So maybe for him, eating at 3 o'clock for him is like eating at 10 in the morning for us. Right? Because we eat so early, he eats so late. So even if he eats at 3 o'clock, he will be able to he'll be able to eat at the Seder tonight. So they said no. In other words, you might think it's subjective. You'll say to yourself, well, I have a different metabolism. I can eat at 4 o'clock a big meal, and 9 o'clock I can eat another big meal. It's no problem for me. It doesn't matter. Still, you have to follow the rule. Starting from 3:30, you're not allowed to have a meal. So you might think Agrippas, he has an unusual schedule. He doesn't eat breakfast. He doesn't eat till 3 o'clock. So for him to eat that, it's just his breakfast. So he's still going to want dinner. It doesn't matter. The Gezerah stands in place. Now, the Gemara says that Amar Rabbi, and who should it really be here? It should be who? Because it's in the parentheses, so usually it tells us. Right, so yeah, it could be Rabbi Yossi or it could not be because it's in the parentheses. Usually it isn't. Aval mitabilu b'minei targima. It says that he can dip minei targima. Minei targima means that he can have like a snack. He can have some kind of an afternoon snack. It doesn't necessarily mean, in other words, what it's prohibiting here is that you cannot have any kind of a meal with bread. So you can have meat, you can have fish, you can have fruit. You just can't have any kind of a meal that's a real heavy meal. Now, obviously, what kind of bread are you going to have on Erev Pesach in the afternoon? You're not allowed to eat bread anyway.
Aperitif, or the Spanish, they call it tapas, or the French.
It's like appetizer almost. Yeah, you're allowed to have that. You're allowed to have that.
Or the Moroccan, they call it kemia. Mm-hmm. In the afternoon, around the 5.
They have like a snack in the afternoon before dinner.
Go to coffee,
Yeah, it's a nice thing. Yeah. So he says, Rabbi Yitzchak matbil biyarkei, and Rabbi Yitzchak would eat vegetables. He would have salad in the afternoon. So the people, they would eat light foods, nothing heavy that's going to make you have difficulty eating at night. We also learned in a Braita that they would eat the inner organs. In other words, the organs of the animal meat, this type of meat, as a snack. So the shamash would dip that and eat that and give it in front of the guests. In other words, the people would be waiting around for the seder at night. Maybe they would have a minyan in their house for arvit or something like that to be waiting around. So he would serve them, a snack, even meat, so different kinds of snack in the afternoon as they were waiting. So that he didn't make them eat nothing. They just couldn't have a meal. Now, of course, the question is raised: what kind of meal can you have on Erev Pesach in the afternoon? You're not allowed to have bread, and you're not allowed to have matzah. So it's interesting to note that the Talmud Bavli never mentions anything about not eating matzah on Erev Pesach. That comes from Talmud Yerushalmi. So it could be that in Bavel they ate matzah on Erev Pesach. Could be. Because it never mentions anything otherwise in the Yerushalmi. I'm sorry, in the Bavli. So then it says, and even though there's no proof for this, there is a hint to it, because it says you should plow a well-prepared field. Don't plant among the thorns. What does that mean? It means that a person should have appetizers. You want to, just like you want to prepare the ground before you plant. You don't plant among the thorns. You prepare the ground, you plow it, and then you plant. So too, give people appetizer in the afternoon. Otherwise, what happens? We know this. What's the phenomenon that happens after Yom Kippur? A person doesn't eat all day, and then they're so hungry. Oh my God, I'm so hungry. They come and eat one bite of food. They can't eat anything. Right? Because when you don't eat all day, your stomach, it shrinks, you don't have the same appetite. So he's saying, give a little appetizer. It backfires if people fast all day on Erev Pesach, because then they won't be able to eat at night. So you give them a little appetizer beforehand, it whets their appetite. Now they have a desire for food. Now you'll be able to, in other words, going to an extreme won't help you. Telling people not to eat at all. Give them a little bit so they want more. Now when the Seder comes, they're going to want to eat. That's the logic behind it. Okay, that's what he's quoting from the pasuk. Rava would drink wine all day long at Erev Pesach. Because he said that this would make him hungry to want to eat more matzah in the night. In other words, he would eat the matzah with more gusto because he drank a lot of wine. Where did I get the idea that wine makes you have a greater appetite? We learned in the Mishnah that it says that between the first 2 cups of the seder, you're allowed to drink wine. More wine. In other words, let's say you had the first cup, Kadesh or Chatz, right? Kadesh is the first one. You did Kadesh, you drank the wine. You did Magid, you drank the wine. Okay? But in between those, when you're doing the Magid part, he says you can drink between them too. You can drink between the first cup and the second cup. If you want to drink additional wine, it's okay, as long as you have that final glass at the end. So what's the reason? So he's saying the reason is because if it's going to fill you, you shouldn't be allowed to drink more. You're going to be full from all that wine drinking. What you see from that is that it makes you hungrier. Drinking the wine is going to increase your appetite. Okay, now incidentally, why is it that between the 3rd and 4th cup you're not allowed to drink? So there are 2 reasons that are given for it in the Mefarshim here. One of them is that that when you drink in between, it looks like you're adding another cup. Okay, in the beginning of the Seder, it doesn't look like that because you know that you have 2 left. But at the end, you say, oh, you added a 4th one. Oh, is it the 5th one, a 6th one? It looks like you're adding on to the end. The other reason that makes the most sense to me is that just a practical reason that they didn't want you to, which is that at the end of the Seder, everyone starts getting a little drunk from the wine, right? They start falling asleep, everyone, because they drank the first 2 cups, they eat, but then once they get to like a barech, people are, falling, the 3rd cup, they start to fall asleep. So if you drink more, forget it, you're not going to do the Hallel. It's going to be a second Pesach, but second Purim, instead of Pesach Sheni, Purim Sheni. Alright, so the Gemara says, so Rav Sheshet used to fast all day long on Erev Pesach, the opposite of what we just said. He didn't drink wine all day, he fasted all day. So what was the reason for this? So maybe we could figure out an interesting rationale for Rav Sheshet's behavior. This is very creative. Maybe Rav Sheshet holds that the reason why you're not allowed to eat on Erev Pesach, remember we mentioned on the previous daf, there were 2 reasons given. Reason number 1 was because you're not going to eat at night. Reason number 2 was because maybe you're going to forget to bring the Korban Pesach. If you hold that it's because you're going to forget to bring the Korban Pesach, then you have to stop eating at 12:30, not 3:30. So maybe Rav Sheshet said the reason why you're not allowed to eat a meal in the afternoon was because you might forget to bring the Korban Pesach. And therefore he would have extended it back to 12:30. But he added another thing, V'savar laki hada amar Rabbi Oshaya, and he also agreed with Rabbi Oshaya, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, that Machshir haya Rabbi Ben Betera, that Ben Betera used to validate, but Pesach sheshachato shacharit ba'arba'asar lishmo. Which means to say that even though the time of Korban Pesach is the afternoon of Erev Pesach, that's when you're supposed to bring it in the afternoon. According to Ben Betera, Rabbi Eliezer said that Ben Betera said that if you slaughtered the Korban Pesach in the morning, at 9 in the morning, it's also okay, b'diavad. Okay? He was the head, yeah. So he said that. So umitzafra zman pischahu de kulayoma chazel pischa. But what does that mean according to Ben Betera? Ben Betera holds that all day long is kasher to bring the Korban Pesach, because he says it doesn't have to be the afternoon. You could do it even in the morning. And if you could do it even in the morning, that means all day is capable of being a time for Korban Pesach. So if Rav Sheshet thinks that the reason you're not supposed to eat on Erev Pesach is connected to the timing of the Korban Pesach, and he also maintains that the timing of the Korban Pesach was all day long, so what is the result? All day long, you're not allowed to eat. Okay? Because according to Ben Betera, when it says Ben Ha'arbaim, Ben Arbaim usually means the afternoon. So it says about the Korban Pesach, it has to be Ben Arbaim in the afternoon. Ben Betera said it doesn't mean Ben Arbaim of that day in the afternoon. It means between the 2 evenings, last night and tonight. Meaning all day today. Okay, that's how we interpreted it. So is that why Rav Sheshet didn't eat all day? Because he said all day is really good for the Korban Pesach, according to Ben Betera. and I hold that the reason you're not supposed to eat a meal on Erev Pesach is connected to the Korban Pesach. Lo, they said no, that's not true. Shani Rav Sheshet the istanistava. Ditaim betzafra midi l'orta lo hava mehane le'michla. No, Rav Sheshet was just very particular. If he ate anything during the day, he wouldn't be able to eat dinner. He was a very light eater. There are people like that. Yeah. So they eat very little, and even if they eat a tiny bit, they're full already. That's just the way that their body works. Everyone's different. So he was istanis. So if he ate just a little bit, he would say, I can't eat tonight. So he had to fast in order to have an appetite for the evening. It says in the Shulchan Aruch that certain pious people, there were many people who were the exceptionally, tzaddikim and pious people. They would fast every Erev Shabbat, so that on Friday night they would come in, and really enjoy the Shabbat meal on a higher level. We learned in the Mishnah that even if you're poor, you have to do the 4 cups on Pesach, and you have to lean when you drink the 4 cups, right? So Itmar says matzah. When you eat the matzah, tarich hasiba, you have to lean. Maror and tarich hasiba, but when you do the maror, we don't lean. We don't lean on our side when we eat the maror. Yain. What about the wine? Itmar mishmei Rav Nachman tarich hasiba. Ve'itmar mishmei Rav Nachman and tarich hasiba. That there were 2 versions of Rav Nachman. In one version, he said you need to lean for the wine at the seder. In another one, he said you don't need to. So what's going on here? It's not really a contradiction. In one case, he was talking about the first 2 cups. In the other case, he was talking about the last 2 cups. Okay? This could be interpreted either way. Which of the 2 cups did he say you need to lean for? We don't know. So Amri lalahai gisa, we could argue it this way. That you might say, what do you need? The first 2 cups you need to lean for. Why? Because that's when you're starting the process of recounting freedom. You're demonstrating freedom by leaning. Because you've already set the tone. In other words, the first 2 that you leaned for was enough. You showed that you're free. You don't need to do it on all of them. And then you had the meal and whatever. And some argue the opposite. Because really the last 2 should require leaning. Because you told the whole story of slavery and you're celebrating now. Now you're celebrating. Now you should lean for 3 and 4. But the first 2, you're still telling the story of being slaves. Maybe that's when you shouldn't lean. So what's the problem? We don't know what Rav Nachman meant, and we have a really good argument for both sides. So therefore, since we don't know, the conclusion is all 4 of them require leaning. So there's a famous Ran here, Perusha Ran, that I remember from years ago. I didn't look it up today, so it's a little rusty, but I remember it's very famous that he asked the question, why don't we say Safek de Rabbanan lekula? We're not sure. So on the first 2, leaning is only midar Rabbanan. It doesn't say in the Torah you have to lean or have 4 cups. The 4 cups, it's midar Rabbanan. So it does. So why don't we say, okay, on the first 2 cups, we don't know if we need to lean or not because we don't know what Rav Nachman meant. If he meant that's when you have to lean or that's when you don't have to lean. So okay, Safek de Rabbanan lekula, we're not going to lean. Then the third and fourth, we don't know. Did he say lean or not lean? Safek de Rabbanan lekula, we don't have to lean. Right? So we shouldn't have to lean at all. Right? So the Ran says, you see a very important principle here. That when we say Safek lekula, Safek lechumra, not when it's going to erase the whole concept. Right? In other words, here it will erase the concept. If we apply Safek de Rabbanan lekula, in other words, why are we being so stringent and saying, we don't know, so we're going to do it for all of them? Why? Because if we said we don't know, so we're not going to do it for any of them, you won't have any leaning for the kosot now. You're going to erase it. So you have only 2 choices. Either we do it for all of them or none of them. So we take all of them. That's the reasoning. Okay, so now...
So Ran says likula.
He says, no, why don't we say lekula? Normally, Safek de Rabbanan lekula. Why don't we say here? Why do we say Safek lechumra here? It's only de Rabbanan.
It's lechumra.
Yeah, but it's lechumra because you're saying you have to do it for all of them, not none of them. Even though we have a good reason on both. Right? We have good reasoning. We could say in both cases we're going to be lenient. So no, instead we say they all require leaning. So prakdan lashme hasiba, leaning on your back like this. Lean back. That's not considered hasiba. That doesn't count. Okay, and also hasibat yamin lashma hasiba. We also say that leaning on your right is not considered leaning. Velood elashema yagdim kanela veshet. And also you could choke if you lean on your right side. Although Rashi here says that if you lean back is when you could choke. That's what we're concerned. Because imagine, if you're lying on your back and you try to eat or drink, of course you could choke. Right? But the Rashbam and what's brought in the Shulchan Aruch is also leaning on your right could potentially be dangerous. Now, interestingly, the Rashbam gives another reason why leaning on your right is not the best leaning. He says because you need your right hand to eat. How are you going to lean on your right? Do this. You're not going to be able to do it. So he said, because remember, they were leaning on couches. Okay, they weren't leaning on a chair with a pillow, pretending. They were really leaning on couches. So you've seen like those Romans, you've seen the pictures of the Romans at their banquet, where they would recline on these couches on their side and they would eat the grapes, the king.
Why really they took it from the Romans?
Huh?
This we know.
The hasiba? Well, they took what was the way of showing chirut. In those times. So there is one Rishon, there's one opinion in the Rishonim that says, you know what, that was just for those times, we don't have to do hasiba because today people don't do that. Right? Today people, they lean back. This is relaxing. When you lean back, they don't lean on the side so much. But there's no recliner on the side. Yeah, they don't have that anymore. People, they do it on. Yeah, well, that's what we do. But it's a tradition that goes back to a time that was how they showed cherut. That was how they showed freedom. Right. So the Rashbam's reason wouldn't apply if you're left-handed because you use your left hand anyway. Right. No, you're right. But he's saying for most people, the reason why it says hasibat yamin is not it doesn't count is because they can't really comfortably eat or drink with their right hand. But the other reason is you might choke. Okay, so now, he'll be endangered. Isha etzel ba'ala. Listen, Sammy, this is important. You're going to like this part. Isha etzel ba'ala. If the wife is in the presence of her husband, lo baya hasiba. She doesn't have to lean. Why not? Do you know why? Because she's not free. Because her husband is really important. He's like the king of the castle, so she can't lean because it's not kavod for her husband. That's so like Rashbam says, mipne emat ba'ala. She's very afraid. Uchfuvalo. She's afraid of him. Okay, so now I don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. So isha hashuva tzricha hasiba. If she's an important woman, then she needs to lean. And the Shulchan Aruch says that kol hanashim shelanu chashuvot. We treat all of our women today, they're chashuvot. We don't say that they're, so they do have to lean. And Rashbam brings another reason that lav darchayu dinashel mizgah, that it wasn't because of the fear of the husband, it was because it's not the normal way of women. They didn't usually recline on couches. That was a thing that the men did. So it wasn't a womanly thing to do. But according to that, it's not clear why it says etzel ba'ala. Why does it mention in front of her husband? Right? The implication is that her husband is important and therefore she doesn't lean. And if she's important in her own right, then she would lean. And we treat all of our women today as being important, so they lean. Ben etzel aviv ba'e hasiba. A son in the presence of his father, even though he owes his father kavod, he owes him honor, and he owes him yirah, fear and honor are due to the father, still he leans in that case because the mitzvah is for the father to be telling the son the story, and for the son to be participating. The father can't say, I'm not going to let you do the mitzvah. That would contradict the whole point of a Pesach. Okay. So or as Rashbam says, "Delo have kafuf kol kach." He's not as subordinate to his father as, let's say, a servant would be before a master. But it's interesting. What, the mother is more subordinate to the father. The wife is more subordinate to the husband than the son is to the father. It's hard to believe that. It's a hard idea. It's a more an idea that fits better maybe is that for the son, because the whole mitzvah is centered on the father telling the son, "V'gatala vincha," so therefore the son of course has to participate because it's part of the mitzvah, and the father can't be makpid and say, "I'm not going to let you. I'm going to stand on honor on my and force you to sit straight," because it's not considered respectful in front of let's say a rav or something. You go to meet with somebody important, you don't sit leaning back. Anybody important, you wouldn't say, "Oh, how are you doing?" It's not nice. So Ibailahu, they asked a question. Talmid etzel Rabbo mahu. What about a student in the presence of his teacher? Okay. So Tashma, come and listen. Abaye said, Amar Abaye, ki avenan beimor. When we were in the house of the master, zaginan abirche dehadade. We used to lean on one another's knees. In other words, the way that they would lean was they would lean on their knees. They didn't have couches, so it's like us today. So they would lean on the guy next to them. They would lean on the guy's lap or his knees in order to eat or drink. In Rabbah's house, that's what they used to do. Okay, but kiatenan lebe Rav Yosef. But when they came to Rav Yosef's house, Rav Yosef was the successor of Rabbah. Rabbah and Rav Yosef is a famous story. It appears at least twice in Shas that I can remember. The story of Rabbah and Rav Yosef. That Rabbah and Rav Yosef were going to both lead the academy. They were going to both lead the yeshiva. And Rabbah and Rav Yosef, they had different styles and the whole thing, and there's a whole difference between them. So Rabbah was the Rosh Yeshiva first, and then when he died, Rav Yosef took over. Because Rav Yosef knew that he was going to die only a couple of years into his term. So he didn't want to he wanted to be last. He said, I'll be last so that I don't die soon. So Rabbah went first. So that's a famous story in the Talmud. So Rabbah, when Rabbah passed away and Rav Yosef took over, and he became everyone's Rav, because oftentimes you find Abaye talking to Rav Yosef in the Talmud all the time. But Rabbah and Rav Yosef were colleagues. So when Rabbah died and Rav Yosef took over, Amar Lan, he said to us, Lo tzarichtu, you don't need to lean. Why? Morar Rabcha kemorar shamayim. Because the fear of your teacher is like the fear of heaven. So therefore you have to sit straight. You can't lean in the presence of your teacher. Now the halacha that's brought in Shulchan Aruch is that they can ask for permission. They should ask for permission from the Rav to lean at the Seder, and then they're allowed to. But if he says to them, no, I'm not going to give you permission, I'm not going to give you a reshut, I demand respect, then they're not allowed to lean. Okay, so they're exempt from leaning. Meitive, they raised an objection. Im hakol adam mesev vafilu talmid etzel rabbo, that anybody, no matter what, has to lean, even a student in the presence of his teacher. So you just told me that a student in the Talmid, b'mkom Rabbo, when the student is with the teacher, he doesn't have to lean. Now you're telling me he does have to lean. So what's the answer? That's talking about a different type of student. It's talking about a person who is an apprentice to a carpenter. In other words, Talmid and Rav has a universal meaning. It doesn't just mean that the Torah teacher, right? So it means even a teacher, meaning your carpentry teacher, your karate, sensei, who's at the table. You're allowed to lean because you don't, even though you respect him, you're allowed to lean. But that doesn't mean that your Torah teacher, because we said that it has to do with Morar Rabcha kemorar shamayim. That's not talking about your sensei in karate, right? That's talking about your teacher of Torah. So. Ibailu, they asked a question, Shamash Mai, what about the Shamash, the servant who takes care of everybody else, and it takes care of the meal. So he's subordinate to everyone, so does he have to lean? He's not really free. Why is he leaning? Who's he kidding? Who's he trying to fool? We know that he's not free. So Tashma, come and listen, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Shamash achal kazait matzak shu mesev yatsa. Mesev in, lo mesev lo. Even though the shamash is working for you, so really he's not free. Ultimately, he's working. He's on the job. Still, he's not a slave. He's not an eved. He's still working for you, right? He can get another job. He can quit. So therefore, he does have to lean when he does the mitzvot. So Shema Mina Ba'i Hasiba, we see from this that he does in fact have to lean. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Nashim chayavot ve'arba'a kosot halalu, that women also have to drink the 4 cups of wine. What's the reason? Even though it's a mitzvah taseh shazman gerama, it is a positive commandment that is time bound because you have to do it the night of Pesach. There's no other makeup time. Still, because they too were involved in the miracle. There are there's a very fundamental machloket rishonim among the commentaries and argument as to what this means. That they were involved in the mitzvah, in the miracle as well. According to one interpretation that Rashi brings in Masechet Megillah, he says the reason is that and also here, Oh no, he doesn't bring it here. The version here is different, which is really interesting. The version here sounds like more like what the Rashbam says. In Megillah, Masechet Megillah, Rashi says that what it means, Afen Hayu Boto Anis, is that they also benefited from the miracle, and we're giving thanks for the miracle. So just like Chanukah they have to do, Purim they have to do, Pesach they have to do, because they're giving thanks for the miracle that happened to them. However, Rashbam and infiltrated Rashi here, which
even more.
what?
I think even more that they have to participate, like Hanukkah, because of them.
Right, that's the other. Right, that's what the Rashbam says, and it's quoted in the Tosafot in Masechet Megillah, and here Rashi says it, which raises questions about whether this is really Rashi or it's some other thing, and that's why they put the Rashbam in. I don't know, but Rashbam says it's because they were instrumental in the miracle of Pesach. It was because of the Nashim Tzidkaniot and all that, and it was because the righteous women that saved the Jewish people. It was because of Yehudit in the case of Chanukah. It was because of Esther in the case of Purim. Well, there's no miracle in that one. But we're saying in the miracle stories in Purim, right? But in Purim, in Pesach, in Chanukah, they were involved. The only problem that Tosafot raises is then why does it say Af hen hayu boto anes? Because Af hen hayu boto anes says even they were in the miracle. Sounds not that they were better than everybody else. They're also benefited, not that they were better than them. So that's an interesting thing. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Arba kosot halalu terech sheheh bahen kedei mezigat kos yafeh. That you have to have in each one of these 4 cups enough wine for mizigat kos yafeh, for the stirring of a nice cup. In other words, a respectable type of cup. Now, Rashbam says, "B'chol echad kedei sheyeh bahen mizigat kos yafeh shel bracha shiro rova revi'it log kedei sheyimzegenu v'yamod al revi'it log." Basically, what it means is that you need to have, what they would do was, for a revi'it of wine, 1/4 of it was undiluted wine, and 3 parts water. That's how they would make the. That's how they'd make the wine. So so a revi'it of wine, only 1/4 of the revi'it is actually wine. 3/4 is water. Yeah.
How many ounces do we eat?
They say it's about in fluid ounces. I think. What did they say that it is in fluid ounces? The revi'it. What do they say that it is for the? I'm forgetting now what they say. It's like I know for kazayit they always say 28 grams, but I can't remember how they say for fluid ounces. I can't remember now. But they say what it is for revi'it. I have to look it up again, the numbers, but yeah, but it's not that big. It's not that much.
How many eggs?
They do give a measurement for it, but it's escaping me now what the amount is that they say. So maybe 3 fluid ounces, and I got 2.8. I can't remember. Anyway, so it says shata'an chai. If he drank it raw, what does it mean raw? Undiluted wine, which they didn't do. They always mixed it with some kind of water. Yatza. He could still fulfill the mitzvah. Sheta'an bavat achat. If he drank it all at once, yatza. He also could fulfill the mitzvah. Now, what Rashbam brings 2 interpretations. What does it mean he drank it all at once? Does it mean he poured all 4 cups into one big cup and drank them all at once? That's what Rashi says. Rashbam says that wouldn't be drinking them all at once because that's still just 1 cup. He says what it means is you had 4 cups in front of you and you drank 1, 2, 3, 4. He said, okay, now I'm done for the rest of the night. Let's do the seder.
You cannot put all of them in one.
No, you can't do that for sure. So hishkab mehen levanav levnei veto yatza. If you drank some and you gave the rest of it to your children and the members of your household, in other words, you don't have to drink the whole cup. You gave the rest of it to others. That's also fine. Sheta'an chayatza. We said that when you drink it raw, you drink it undiluted, you fulfill the mitzvah. So Amar Rava says yedei yayin yatza. You fulfilled the mitzvah of drinking wine. There are 2 components to arba kosot. One is drinking the wine. One is the seder. You didn't do it ala seder. You didn't do it, in other words, you didn't, so in Shatan Chai, you didn't do it the proper way. Yedei yayin yatza. Okay, but yedei cherut lo yatza. The other part of it is showing, one is drinking wine, one is showing freedom. Showing of freedom you didn't do because you drank it in an undiluted way. That's not the way a person with class drinks it. Right, so you lacked one element of the mitzvah if you drink it without dilution. Then we said, Shata'an bevat achat, if you drank them all at once. So Rav Amar Yedei Yain Yatsa Yedei Arba Kosot Lo Yatsa. Then again, same concept. You fulfilled the mitzvah of drinking wine, which is part of the Arba Kosot, is to drink and to celebrate the Simchat Yom Tov. But you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of having 4 cups at the proper seder. Because you're supposed to have 1 for Kadesh, 1 for Magid, 1 for this, 1 for this. If you don't have them at the right time, you missed that. If you give some of the wine to your children and your family members, you fulfill the mitzvah. That's as long as you drink most of your cup. You can give the rest to somebody else. You don't have to drink the whole thing. You have to drink the majority of the cup, though. There is an objection. That these kosot have to have a revi'it, whether it's undiluted or diluted. In other words, if you decide to use undiluted wine, you have to drink a whole revi'it of undiluted wine. You can't say, well, if I were diluting it, I would only use a quarter of a revi'it, so I only need a quarter of a revi'it. It doesn't work like that. You have to drink, the whole thing. It doesn't matter. Whether it's new wine or old wine, it doesn't matter. You still need the same measurement. Okay?
Grape juice.
It's okay, you can use it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer it has to have the taste and the appearance of wine still. Okay, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. So don't dilute it so much that you can't tell that it's wine anymore. Katani mihat, but what is the relevant point here? It says in the Braita Kidei Revi'it. It says all you need is Revi'it. V'at amrat, and you said Kos Yafeh. You said that you need a Kos Yafeh. Sounds like something else. What's a Kos Yafeh? It's a nice cup. Right? So he says, you're telling me a Revi'it, and now you're telling me Kos Yafeh. Which one is it? So the Rashbam says, he interprets it like this. That the Braita says, all you need is a Revi'it for each one. You said all you need is the amount of a Kos Yafeh for all of them combined. That's how they're interpreting it now. In other words, that you could split it up among all 4. That's how the Rashbam interprets. Amra idi v'idi chad shiurahu. Mai kedei mizigat kos yafeh deka amar lekol chad v'chad dahavudhu kulo revi'it. Okay? In other words, what it means is like this. That you need a revi'it of undiluted wine so that you can put a quarter of a revi'it in each one of the 4 cups and then mix it with the 3/4 of water. Right? It turns out to be the same amount. In other words, Revi'it is the amount you need in total. Revi'it is also the total amount of undiluted wine that you're going to need for all 4 of them. Because if a quarter of each of the 4 cups is undiluted wine mixed with 3/4 of water, if you multiply by 4, you have 1 Revi'it of undiluted wine. So that's what that's why it sounds like 2 different things, but really it's the same thing. You need in each one of the cups 1/4 of it is going to be undiluted wine. And Rabbi Yehuda says, it has to have the taste of wine and also the appearance of wine. Amar Rava says, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda? Because it says, that don't look at wine when it becomes red. In other words, the definition of wine is something that has the appearance of redness. Okay? Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbi said, everybody is obligated in these 4 cups. Echad anashim v'echad nashim, men and women, v'echad tinokot, and even children. Wow. According to this, you give the kids wine. Okay, Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, why are you giving the kids wine? Kids don't drink wine. They're not going to relate to that as an expression of freedom. They're not going to relate to that as an expression of the story. Rather, you give them nuts and treats on Erev Pesach so they'll stay awake and they'll ask questions at the Seder. And it says about Rabbi Akiva that he would give out nuts and he would give out all kinds of things, treats to the kids to keep them awake on Erev Pesach so they would not fall asleep and they would ask questions. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer chotfin matzot b'leilei Pesachim b'shvil tinokot shelo yishnu. And they similarly said that they would grab the matzot. In other words, they would play games with the matzah at the table. Rashbam interprets it as something less exciting. He says that this is just referring to how we pick up the matzah, we bring it back, we pick up the seder plate, we bring it back. We do all kinds of things to keep the kids paying attention. But the Rambam actually says that it means that they would, grab the matzah, they would do all kinds of games with the matzah at the table in order to keep the kids engaged so that they don't fall asleep.